It was supposed to be a peaceful escape, but what he found in the shadows of that island will make you question everything you thought you knew about fate. An unbelievable twist of survival, loyalty, and destiny unfolds. One that will restore your faith in the unbreakable bond between man and dog. Stick with this story until the very end, because what happens next isn't just remarkable, it's something that can only be explained by something greater than chance. The morning sun painted the Caribbean Sea with streaks of gold as the luxury cruise liner Celestial Dream carved its way through calm turquoise waters. Among the guests sipping cocktails and snapping selfies on deck was Adrian Mercer, a 39-year-old corporate strategist from Chicago, whose life was so tightly wound around deadlines and mergers that even paradise felt like a distraction. He wasn't here for fun. His doctor had warned him, either take a break or your heart will do it for you. And so reluctantly, Adrian had booked the cruise. 7 days of forced relaxation through pristine archipelagos, promising nothing but blue skies, spa treatments, and silence. But 3 days in, Adrian couldn't disconnect. His phone, though lifeless without signal, remained glued to his hand like an emotional crutch. On the fourth morning, the ship docked near a small, supposedly uninhabited island called Isla Centaura for a castaway experience. The crew had set up a barbecue and water games along the shore for passengers, but Adrian wasn't in the mood. While the others laughed and posed for group photos, he slipped away down a narrow path veiled by thick greenery. 20 sweaty, mosquito-bitten minutes later, Adrian emerged onto a rocky bluff overlooking a hidden cove. There were no sounds but the gentle churn of waves and birds calling overhead, until something broke the stillness, a ragged, almost strangled bark echoing from below. He froze. A second bark, weak but unmistakable, rose up again. Adrian's heart skipped. He scanned the shoreline and spotted something moving near the driftwood. His eyes narrowed. A dog? Out here? There, limping across the jagged stones, was a German shepherd, gaunt, patches of fur missing, ribs painfully visible beneath its dull coat. The animal stumbled and collapsed into the sand, as if even standing had taken everything it had left. Adrian didn't hesitate. He descended the cliffside recklessly, rocks shifting beneath his feet. Sharp branches tore at his shirt as he pushed through overgrowth, adrenaline overriding his usual caution. When he reached the beach, he slowed, approaching the motionless animal with measured steps. "Hey, hey there," he whispered, voice thick with disbelief. "Where did you come from?" The dog stirred weakly, raising its head just enough to meet his gaze. Its amber eyes locked onto his, filled with exhaustion and something else. Recognition? Hope? Adrian knelt beside the animal, slowly extending a hand. The dog didn't flinch. It leaned forward and gently touched its nose to his palm. A flicker of trust passed between them like an electric current. That one moment unspooled a part of Adrian he didn't know was still intact. "You're not dying here," he murmured. "Not alone." With a strength he didn't realize he still possessed, Adrian lifted the fragile body into his arms. The dog's ribs jabbed against his chest, its body almost weightless. And yet Adrian felt the full gravity of what he was doing. Somehow he knew. This wasn't just a rescue. This was fate. He should have walked away. But something in that dog's eyes told him this was a moment that would haunt him forever if he didn't act. Adrian staggered back up the narrow trail with the dog cradled in his arms. Every step a battle against the incline, heat, and the burden of a life clinging to his chest. Sweat drenched his shirt, and his breath came in ragged gasps. But he didn't stop. Not even when thorns clawed at his legs or when a branch whipped across his face, leaving a welt. He was driven by something deeper than sympathy, a visceral need to protect this creature that should have never survived out here. By the time he reached the main beach, the island festivities were in full swing. Laughter, music, and the smell of grilled meat filled the air. His disheveled appearance and the limp dog in his arms silenced the crowd almost instantly. "What the hell?" a passenger muttered. Crew members rushed toward him, expressions flipping between confusion and concern. "Sir?" One of the excursion staff said, stepping in front of him. You can't bring an animal on board. Health protocols. We have procedures. He was abandoned. Adrian barked louder than he intended. He's dying. There was a pause. The woman's polite smile faltered. We understand, she said more gently, but we need to check with the captain. It's complicated. International travel. Then leave me here, Adrian snapped. Take your ship. I'll stay. Gasps rippled through the passengers. Even Adrian was surprised by his own words. The man who calculated risks for a living had just thrown his itinerary, career, and comfort overboard for a half-dead dog. Word spread fast. By the time the captain was informed, a small crowd had formed, passengers murmuring, some sympathetic, others annoyed at the delay. That's when Dr. Lena Ruiz, the ship's medical officer, pushed through. A no-nonsense woman with sharp eyes and a stethoscope always slung over one shoulder. I'm no vet, she said, kneeling beside the dog, but he's severely dehydrated, malnourished. Look at these paws, torn to ribbons. He's been walking on sharp coral. His coat's got salt burns. He's been here for weeks. That settled it for Adrian. Get me back to the nearest port, somewhere with a clinic. 3 hours and several $1,000s later, Adrian sat in a cramped veterinary office on the island of Santa Clara, watching an IV drip slowly into the shepherd's leg. The vet, Dr. Jorge Alonso, scanned the animal for a chip. Nothing. He's about 4 or 5, male, good breed, but no tag, no records. He's lucky you found him. Another day or two, and he wouldn't have made it. Adrian didn't reply. He just stared at the dog lying on the metal table. Something about him seemed anchored, like he wasn't just hanging on to life. He was waiting for something, or someone. You're calling him anything? The vet asked. Adrian blinked, then smiled faintly. Castor, he said, like the twin star, because he survived out there, completely alone. As Castor lay recovering under the sterile glow of the clinic lights, Adrian's phone buzzed. Dozens of messages from work, urgent, impatient, and aggressive. But for once, he didn't care. He slid the phone into his pocket and didn't look at it again. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows through the cracked blinds. Adrian leaned forward, resting a hand on Castor's paw. Wherever you came from, whatever you went through, it's over now. But neither of them had any idea. This was only the beginning. A man walks off a luxury cruise to save a dying dog. But what he uncovers next is something no one could have imagined. Not even him. The following day, Castor lay curled on the hotel room floor, his body still frail but his eyes brighter, more alert. The IV bag had been removed, replaced with oral medication in a strict feeding schedule. Adrian sat nearby, eating cold toast, his mind whirling with unanswered questions. How had this dog ended up on an island that no one lived on? And more importantly, how had he survived? 3 days passed. Castor began to stand without wobbling. He limped, yes, but with intent. He followed Adrian around the room, resting his head on the man's knee every time he sat down, as if anchoring them both in the moment. The bond was no longer just survival, it was kinship. On the 4th morning, Adrian took Castor for a cautious walk along the quiet edge of Santa Clara's southern beach. The waves rolled gently in the background. A few locals worked on their boats, repairing nets, stacking crates of supplies. One man, thin, sun-leathered, and silent, paused mid-repair when he spotted Castor. His eyes went wide. His hands dropped the rope he'd been mending. El Perro, he whispered. Adrian slowed. You recognize him. The fisherman pointed toward the sea, speaking quickly in Spanish. Adrian caught only fragments. Boat, storm, perro, perdido. A lost dog, a boat, a storm. The man mimed a vessel capsizing, then pointed again at Castor. He drew a line across his throat and crossed himself. Adrian's heart thudded. Are you saying you saw this dog before? Out there? A younger man nearby, hearing the conversation, stepped in and offered a translation. He says 3 months ago, during a bad storm, he saw a yacht go down. Big one. He says a man and a dog were on it. They searched the coast for bodies. Never found either. Adrian knelt beside Castor, who had stopped walking, and now stared intently at the fisherman, as if he understood every word. "What happened to the man?" Adrian asked. The translator hesitated. "The boat's owner, an American, was presumed drowned. The sea gives back what it chooses, they say. But the dog, no one expected the dog to come back." That night, Adrian searched the local news archives from 3 months ago. There it was. A small article buried in the digital clutter: "Yacht lost off Santa Clara coast. Owner presumed dead." The man's name was Nathan Calloway, a 42-year-old from Oregon who had left behind a career in architecture to sail the world. The photo showed him standing beside a sleek white yacht. Sitting loyally beside him on the dock, tongue lolling and eyes bright, was a German shepherd. Adrian's breath caught in his throat. It was Castor. The same ears, the same face, the same posture. Time and malnutrition had taken their toll, but it was unmistakably the same dog. He looked over at Castor, now curled up on the hotel bed, watching him, almost as if waiting for him to put the pieces together. "How did you survive, buddy?" Adrian murmured. "And why do I feel like I already know you?" The dog didn't move, but his gaze stayed steady, unwavering. And in that stillness, Adrian felt something shift. He wasn't just dealing with a miraculous survivor. He was stepping into a mystery that was far from over. The sea had stolen a man's life, but somehow his dog came back. And the more Adrian learned, the less this felt like coincidence. Adrian couldn't sleep. The photo of Nathan Calloway and Castor, or Max, as the article named him, was burned into his mind. It wasn't just that the dog had survived. It was the way he looked at Adrian, with a familiarity that chilled him to the bone. The next morning, Adrian contacted the local maritime authorities. After verifying his identity, they pulled the original case report. Yes, they confirmed, a vessel named the Solstice had sent out a mayday 3 months prior. It had been caught in a freak squall just 18 miles from Isla Santora. Debris washed up for days afterward. The owner, Nathan Calloway, had never been found. "There was mention of a dog on board?" Adrian asked. A pause, then, "Yes." Calloway's sister confirmed he traveled with his German shepherd. They were inseparable. That afternoon, Castor, or Max, lay resting on the balcony, the ocean breeze ruffling his recovering coat. Adrian sat nearby, phone in hand, staring at the contact the authorities had provided. Eliza Calloway, Nathan's younger sister, now living in Montana. It took 3 attempts before she picked up. Her voice was wary at first, but when Adrian explained who he was and described the dog, her breath hitched audibly. "Can you show me?" she asked. They video called. Adrian angled the camera toward Castor, who sat up as soon as he heard Eliza's voice. "Max?" she whispered, and the dog immediately perked up, ears forward, tail twitching. Adrian saw goosebumps rise along Eliza's arms. "That's him," she said, her voice cracking. "That's really him." For the next hour, she poured out stories about how Nathan had left his firm to find something real, how he'd built his boat from scratch, how he'd designed a special compartment just for Max. He said they were going to see the world together. "And you haven't heard anything since the storm?" Adrian asked. "Nothing. They searched for weeks. They never found him. I didn't think Max had survived either. But you say you found him on Santora?" Adrian nodded. He was alone. No food, no water. Somehow he made it. Eliza wiped tears from her cheeks. He was Nathan's everything. But if Max survived, maybe part of Nathan is still with him. Adrian glanced at Castor. Max, who now sat watching the screen, eyes focused, head slightly tilted. "Listen," Eliza continued, "I'd love to have him back. But I have stage 4 lymphoma. I'm not strong enough to care for him the way he needs. And honestly," she paused, "I think you were meant to find him." The words struck Adrian like lightning. He ended the call promising to stay in touch and give Max the best life possible. But the conversation stirred something deeper, a feeling he couldn't explain, as if Max hadn't just survived for himself. but for Adrian too. That night, a storm rolled across the horizon. Thunder grumbled like a distant warning. Adrian dreamt of drowning, his arms thrashing in a sea of black water. But in the dream, Max wasn't swimming to save him. It was the other way around. When he woke, drenched in sweat, Max sat at the edge of the bed, staring at him with glowing amber eyes, like he knew something Adrian didn't. And maybe he did. The storm outside had passed, but something far more powerful was rising between them. A connection that defied logic and maybe even time. The next morning, the skies were calm, but Max was restless. He paced the hotel room like a soldier on alert, pausing only to check the door or watch Adrian with laser focus. When Adrian stepped into the bathroom to brush his teeth, Max waited outside, ears perked. When he sat to eat breakfast, Max settled nearby, his eyes following every movement like a shadow that refused to detach. "You're acting like you know what I'm going to do before I do it," Adrian muttered, half smiling. "You're starting to freak me out." But he wasn't really joking. At the vet clinic later that day, Dr. Alonso checked Max's progress. "I've never seen a recovery like this," he said, checking the dog's vitals. "It's like his system just flipped back on, as if he had a reason now." Adrian relayed the fisherman's story, the yacht, the storm, and the connection to Nathan Calloway. The doctor listened, nodding slowly. "You know," Dr. Alonso said, "there's an old belief down here. When someone dies at sea, their spirit doesn't always go with them. Sometimes it finds another way back." Adrian raised a brow. "You mean like reincarnation?" "Not exactly," the vet replied, placing a hand gently on Max's head. "More like unfinished business." Adrian wanted to scoff, but the way Max leaned into the vet's touch, the way he had responded to Eliza's voice, to Nathan's name, it was hard to argue with results, and harder still to ignore the chills dancing along his arms. That evening, Adrian and Max took another walk, this time through the island's winding harbor town. The golden light of dusk spilled over the cobbled streets, casting long shadows. Children ran barefoot, chasing each other between market stalls. Locals waved politely as Adrian passed with the towering shepherd at his side. But then, something odd happened. An elderly man sitting outside a cafe dropped his coffee when he saw Max. The porcelain cup shattered on the stone walkway, but the man didn't react. He just stared. "Señor?" he whispered, almost reverently, then louder. "Es el perro del barco, el que regresó solo." Adrian stopped. What did he say? A passing teenager overheard and translated. He said, "That's the dog from the boat, the one who came back alone." Adrian's breath hitched. The man approached, speaking more urgently now, gesturing with weathered hands. The teenager continued translating. "He saw the yacht months ago. A terrible storm. He says the dog was trying to drag someone from the water before the waves took him." Adrian went cold. He saw Max in the storm? Yes, he thought it was a dream, or maybe a ghost. Max stood still as stone, watching the man speak, his head cocked to one side. Then, without warning, he stepped forward and pressed his nose gently into the man's hand. The old man gasped. "He remembers," he whispered. "He knows who I am." Adrian felt the ground shift beneath him. Something ancient and unspoken passed between the three of them. A thread tying past to present. Later, back at the hotel, Adrian sat on the balcony in silence, while Max lay curled beside his chair. The ocean glittered beneath a rising moon, and all he could hear was the soft lap of waves against the rocks. "Who are you, really?" Adrian whispered into the night. Max didn't answer, of course, but his eyes never left Adrian's, and in them was a truth that felt too big for words. He thought the strangest part of this story was over, until a violent storm returned, and the dog did something no animal ever should have been able to do. The forecast hadn't called for anything more than light rain, but by midnight, Santa Clara was under siege. The wind screamed through narrow alleys, flinging debris like angry hands. Waves crashed against the seawall, spraying salty foam over parked scooters and cafe tables long since abandoned. Inside the hotel, the power flickered. Adrian had just finished brushing his teeth when Max began to whine, a low, anxious sound that quickly rose into urgent pacing. His paws clicked against the tile floor as he moved from the door to the window, back and forth, ears pinned flat. "What's wrong, boy?" Adrian asked, stepping out of the bathroom. "It's just a storm." But Max didn't settle. He tugged at Adrian's sleeve with his teeth, something he'd never done before. Then he darted to the door and back again, barking, not wildly, but with purpose, insistence. Adrian grabbed his raincoat, more out of concern than belief, and followed the dog down the hallway, past the flickering lights and the startled staff member at the front desk. "Sir?" the receptionist called after him. "You're not going out in this, are you?" But Max was already out the door. Rain slapped Adrian in the face the moment he stepped outside. He followed Max down the stone path behind the hotel that led to the beach. Lightning clawed across the sky, illuminating the waterline. And that's when Adrian saw it. A small fishing boat had broken free from its mooring and was being battered against the jagged rocks. In it was a teenager, maybe 16, frantically trying to keep the vessel from capsizing. His screams were lost in the wind, but his terror was unmistakable. Max didn't hesitate. He bolted for the water and dove in. "Max, no!" Adrian yelled, sprinting toward the shoreline. By the time he reached the edge, Max was already slicing through the waves like a torpedo, his head bobbing up between swells, swimming with a precision and power no half-starved animal should have possessed. Adrian tore off his shoes and jumped in after him. The cold hit like a hammer. Salt water flooded his mouth, his lungs screamed, and the waves tried to spin him like a leaf. But he fought forward, catching glimpses of Max as they neared the floundering boat. The teenager clung to one side, trying to reach for the dog. Max swam to the stern, barking furiously, urging the boy to shift his weight, steering him, guiding him. Somehow the kid understood. Adrian reached the vessel moments later. With Max pushing from one side and Adrian pulling from the other, they steadied it long enough for the boy to leap toward the shallows. He stumbled into the surf as hotel staff arrived with ropes and flashlights, rushing to help. Adrian collapsed beside Max on the wet sand, gasping for air. Max's sides heaved with exhaustion, his body soaked and trembling, but his eyes stayed on the boy, tracking every breath, every movement. "He saved him," Adrian muttered, voice raw with disbelief. "You saved him." Behind him, Dr. Alonso had arrived with an emergency kit in hand. He knelt beside Max and began checking his vitals. "This isn't possible," he whispered, eyes wide. "He's still in recovery. A rescue like that? He shouldn't have had the strength. This defies biology." Adrian stared at the dog lying between them, soaked, shivering, alive. And somewhere deep inside, a terrifying and beautiful thought began to form. They said no dog could survive like this. But what if he wasn't just a dog? What if he was something more? Morning broke over Santa Clara with eerie calm, as if the storm had never happened. The hotel staff buzzed with stories of the dramatic rescue, and by midday, local news outlets had picked it up. Interviews were conducted, photos snapped. Everyone wanted to know how a half-starved German shepherd had pulled off a rescue worthy of a medal. Adrian sat with Max in their room, brushing the damp fur behind the dog's ears. Despite the exhaustion from the night before, Max looked alert, almost proud, as if saving a life had restored a missing piece of him. The boy they rescued, Carlos, had suffered only minor injuries. When Adrian visited the family later that afternoon, Carlos's mother hugged him like a long-lost relative. But it was Max she knelt beside, whispering in Spanish with tears in her eyes, pressing her forehead against his muzzle. "He is not a normal dog," she told Adrian. "He has the soul of something older, wiser." Adrian didn't disagree. That night, unable to sleep, Adrian sat on the balcony with his laptop and scoured the internet again. He found another photo of Nathan Calloway, this one less formal, taken during a marina cookout. Nathan was smiling wide, beer in one hand, the other resting on Max's back. A glimmer of freedom in his eyes that Adrian had never known in his own reflection. He studied the image. Nathan looked older than him, but familiar. uncomfortably so. Could grief do that? Could guilt? Or was something else happening here? Adrian shook his head, but a persistent thought refused to leave him alone. What if I didn't just find Max? What if he found me? The next morning, Adrian returned to the harbor and sought out the old fisherman who had first reacted so strangely to Max. This time, with the help of a fluent translator, the full story came out. Miguel says there was something strange about the storm that sank the yacht, the translator explained. It came suddenly, no warning. Many boats made it back safely, but not the Americans. Miguel's eyes stayed fixed on Max, who now sat beside Adrian, calm and watchful. He says, the translator continued slowly, there is a belief among seafarers. When a sailor dies at sea with unfinished purpose, his spirit may return, sometimes in a seabird, a dolphin, or a beloved animal, to protect, to complete the story. Adrian swallowed. And he thinks Max, the translator hesitated, then nodded. He believes the man's soul is inside the dog. That's how he survived. That's why he found you. Adrian wanted to reject it, wanted to laugh, but the puzzle pieces were aligning in ways science couldn't explain. That night, Adrian didn't dream. He sat up in bed watching Max sleep at the foot, and then slowly, the dog opened one eye and stared directly back. Not like a pet, but like a person remembering something just out of reach. He came to escape his life. He found a dog who saved one. But now he was starting to realize, maybe the one being rescued all along was him. Days passed. The sun returned. Tourists flooded the beaches again. The staff at the hotel resumed their routines. But Adrian couldn't go back to who he was before. Not after the storm, not after Max. He extended his stay in Santa Clara. What was originally a one-week trip had turned into 3. His assistant back in Chicago was handling emails with increasing impatience. And his boss had called 3 times already, each one sharper than the last. But Adrian didn't return the calls. Instead, he spent his mornings walking the beach with Max, who now had a spring in his step, his coat thickening with color, his muscles returning with each day. The locals no longer stared at the pair with curiosity. They nodded in quiet recognition, some offering whispers of Angel Perro, angel dog, while others simply smiled. Max had become a symbol, not just of survival, but of something deeper, something none of them could name. One afternoon, Adrian received a video message from Eliza Calloway. She was in a hospital gown, hooked to an IV, but her eyes were warm. I wanted you to know, she said, voice soft but steady, that I've told the authorities to transfer full custody of Max to you. You saved him, and I think maybe he saved you too. Adrian swallowed hard. I also have something for you, she added. Nathan left a letter. He gave it to me just before he left on his trip. Said it was just in case. I'll have it sent to your hotel. Open it when you're ready. The next evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the ocean in copper and fire, Adrian took Max for one last walk along the harbor. They passed a group of school kids playing football in the sand, and Max barked once, tail wagging. Adrian smiled. You ready to go home, buddy? But where was home now? He booked a flight back to the U.S. The paperwork for Max expedited with Eliza's help and veterinary clearance. At the airport, Max stayed close, calmly navigating the chaos of travelers and baggage carts as if he'd done it all before. 3 days later, Adrian stood in his Chicago apartment, everything feeling strange and artificial. The silence, once comforting, now felt oppressive. The walls were white, the furniture cold. The skyline, once inspiring, now looked like steel bars. Max paced the living room briefly, then curled beside the window, watching the city below. Adrian sat across from him, holding the envelope Eliza had sent. His hands trembled slightly as he broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in clean, slanted letters. To whoever finds this letter, if you're reading this, I didn't make it back. I hope Max did. He's stronger than I ever was. I built a life that looked perfect on paper, but it never felt real. The ocean gave me something back, freedom, purpose, a chance to start again. If Max found you, you're a part of that. Take care of him, And take care of yourself too. Don't waste your second chance. Signed, Nathan Calloway. Adrian stared at the words until they blurred. When he looked up, Max was watching him. And in that gaze, Adrian saw not just loyalty, but understanding, gratitude, and maybe even recognition. He opened a letter meant for someone else and discovered it was written for him all along. The days in Chicago didn't feel real anymore. The calendar filled itself with meetings, reminders, corporate chatter, but Adrian had stopped responding. Max had adjusted quickly to the new surroundings, yet his eyes always drifted toward the window, the lake, the clouds moving like sails above the buildings, as if something inside him still belonged to the ocean. Adrian understood the feeling too well. A week after returning, he made a decision that would have once terrified him. He resigned. No long explanations, no dramatic exit. Just a clean, final goodbye to the company that had defined every moment of his adult life. He shut down his work phone, sold the condo, canceled every subscription that reminded him of the man he used to be. 3 months later, Adrian and Max stood at a coastal overlooking California, where the land dropped into the vast Pacific. The ocean wind was brisk and clean. A beat-up camper van sat behind them, filled with supplies and a journal full of scrawled ideas for a foundation Adrian planned to start. The Calloway Project, dedicated to animal rescue, survivor recovery, and honoring the spirit of those who never made it back. Max, now strong and sleek, leapt from the van and trotted ahead. He sniffed the wind like a traveler, reacquainting himself with an old friend. His body no longer bore the scars of starvation, though his eyes still held that ancient gravity, as if he'd seen a lifetime's and carried one more than most. They made their way to a quiet stretch of sand, just beyond a rocky cliff. Adrian knelt, opened his backpack, and pulled out the sealed envelope Eliza had placed in his hands before he left Santa Clara. She had said it was something Nathan had written before his final voyage, a just-in-case letter. He opened it with care, the pages yellowed at the corners, the ink slightly smudged in places. If you found Max and you're reading this, then I didn't make it. But that means you did. And I need you to know something. This journey was never just about escape. It was about rediscovery, about facing the silence and learning who I really was, without the noise of expectations. Max was part of that. He's more than a dog. He's my anchor, my witness, my only real friend. I always said if something ever happened to me, he'd find someone who needed saving, not the other way around. Adrian's hand shook slightly as he turned the page. So if he found you, it's because you're not lost. Not really. Just drifting, like I was. And now? Maybe now it's your turn to wake up. Live. Really live. Because life doesn't wait forever. And sometimes, a storm is the only thing that sets us free. It was signed simply, Nathan. Adrian folded the letter slowly, then looked over at Max. The dog was standing at the water's edge, staring out to sea. When Adrian joined him, Max looked up, and then did something he hadn't done since their first day on that beach. He pressed his muzzle into Adrian's hand, the same way he had that first time, the gesture that had changed everything. And for the first time in a long time, Adrian didn't feel like he was holding a past he couldn't escape. He was holding a future he was finally ready to live. Some stories end with goodbye, but the most powerful ones begin with a second chance. 6 months had passed since that cruise, since that single bark from the jungle shattered Adrian's routine and cracked open the life he didn't realize was suffocating him. What began as a detour became destiny, and what Adrian once thought was a dying dog turned out to be his greatest teacher. He and Max had since crossed 6 states, visited countless shelters, and told their story in community centers, school gyms, and coffee shops. Everywhere they went, people listened. Some cried. Some held their dogs a little tighter. All of them felt something deeper stirring beneath the surface. The Calloway Project was now fully operational, helping fund animal rescues, rehabilitation programs, and grief therapy for those who had lost loved ones at sea. Its motto was taken directly from Nathan's final letter: live, really live. And that's exactly what Adrian and Max were doing. In Oregon, they revisited the last marina Nathan had departed from. Several workers still remembered the tall man with the quiet smile and the dog who followed him like a shadow. One old dock hand placed a hand on Max's head and simply whispered, "You made it back." Later, they visited Eliza Calloway in Colorado. She was weaker now, her voice softer, but her spirit sharp. She hugged Max so tightly it made Adrian blink back tears. "He never really left," she said, looking into Max's eyes. "He just changed the way he showed up." Before they left, Eliza handed Adrian a final envelope, this one marked with both her and Nathan's names. Inside were two things: a small silver pendant etched with coordinates, presumably Nathan's final voyage, and a handwritten note that read, "Where the storm tried to end us, that's where we began." Adrian wore the pendant now, not as a memorial, but as a promise. On a crisp morning, parked beside the Pacific Coast Highway, Adrian stepped out of the camper van and breathed in the ocean air. Max leapt down beside him, tail wagging, eyes bright. His coat gleamed in the sunlight, thick and full, a stark contrast to the skeletal figure Adrian had once cradled on the distant beach. They walked the cliffside trail together, waves crashing below, gulls riding the wind above. And when they reached the overlook, Adrian knelt beside Max. "You know," he whispered, scratching behind the shepherd's ear, "I still don't know if Nathan is really in there somewhere." Max leaned against him gently, resting his head on Adrian's shoulder. "But I do know this," Adrian continued. "You didn't just survive. You came back for something. And maybe that something was me." Max barked once, just once, then took off down the trail, pausing to look back with that familiar, knowing gaze. Adrian smiled and ran after him, laughter carried away on the wind. Because whether by fate, miracle, or mystery, one thing was certain: the man who had stepped onto that cruise ship was gone, and the one running toward the future, he was finally free.